Okay, so we are at our last biotic metric, which is invasive exotic plant species cover. Now, we talked in native community composition about native versus exotic species, but there we were talking about any non-native species versus the native species. Here, all we are talking about are those things that are on the noxious plant species list, which is a list that's published for the state of New Mexico. It gets updated about every 5 years, and it does change a little bit. The current RAM has the current list in it, which was updated in 2020. And basically anything that's on that list that's listed as a class A, B, or C weed in the state of New Mexico is what counts in this metric. And this is actually the metric where you're going to have some botany skills, because you do need to know your noxious weeds for the state. Luckily, it's not a huge list. It's about 40 species, and they tend to be really localized. That's why they're on the list. They tend to be invasive in certain quadrants of the state. So for the area you're going to, you need to know those weeds, and you need to know them spot on. You have to be able to say, when you're walking through a field, I see that. That's bull thistle. It's on my list. I need to put it on my noxious weed list for this polygon. And there are some really great little handbooks. The noxious weed list is published by the NMDA down at Las Cruces in the ag, I think they're in the ag school at Las Cruces State. And you can often, there's often a little guide you can get from them that actually has pictures and descriptions and shows the distribution of the species. So you can get some help to get yourself up to speed on which species you need to watch for. I will tell you as a heads up that Siberian elm, Russian olive, and salt cedar are all on the noxious weed list as seaweeds. So those will often be dominants in your stand, and those are pretty, hopefully everyone who's working in wetlands in New Mexico recognizes those quickly. And so why do we care about these noxious weeds? Well, they're noxious for a reason. They have a tendency to get into a site and take it over. They tend to disrupt function. They tend to disrupt reproduction on native species. They tend to alter the habitat for wildlife because they are noxious non-native species. A lot of the native species of animals and plants, or not animals and plants, animals, insects, birds, etc., that would use a native species may not be able to use one of these noxious species. And they tend to thrive in areas that have been hydrologically disrupted or otherwise disrupted. So for all those reasons, we really want to keep an eye on how much noxious weed cover we have in a site. So let's go to slide 27. And this is how we measure this. Now remember, as we were walking through our polygons when we were making our map, we were keeping our eye out for those noxious species. Do we see elms? Do we see Siberian elm? Do we see thistles? And we had a few thistles on our example site that were non-native, that were in spots on the polygons. And we've got all that data on our worksheet 5. So there it is on worksheet 5, that third column over. We've got the percentage cover for all the noxious species. We have the species listed as well. To rate the metric, we don't need the species listed, but we list them here because a lot of times land managers might want to go deal with those species, and it's just really helpful in the data set of your assessment site to know which noxious species you saw. Because especially when they're in low covers like here, they won't be on your dominant species list. And you have two ways of doing this. Usually it's an estimate. You've got each polygon has a percentage cover. So for our polygons on our example site, polygon 1 didn't have any noxious species. But all the other polygons had some cover. Most of them were a small amount, like 0.5%. There was one that had 1%, and then there was 7%, but that 7% was in a pretty tiny polygon, this polygon 6. So overall, what we're estimating now, we're using our data on worksheet 5, and this doesn't directly calculate, but we eyeball it, we look at it, we estimate, and we say, overall, for my whole sample area that I just walked through, how much noxious weed cover do I have? And it helps to know what the rating scale is. It's a pretty simple rating scale. 0 is an A. Well, we're definitely not an A because we had some. Less than 1% is a 3. 1% to 10% is a 2. And once you get more than 10% cover in your sample area as a whole, you're in the D category. And the reason that rating scale is so, there's such a small gap there that you get to fill in is because once you get over 10% noxious weeds, a lot of times that means they're starting to run away with the site. This is why they're noxious. They take over. So for our example site, we had one polygon that had 7% cover, and all the other polygons had 0.5% or 1 or 0. And so as an overall average, we estimated that that site had 0.5% noxious weed cover, and that for the site as a whole, it was in that category of 0 to 1% for the whole site. Because the big polygon that was 45% was nothing, had no cover. So over the whole place, for the rest of it, it averaged out to about to something less than 1%. And that estimate is really just for you. The important part is that rating. Was it 0, 0 to 1, 1 to 10, or less, or more than 10? So that's it. We've rated our we've rated our invasive exotic plant species cover. That was our last biotic metric. We've rated all 5 of our biotic metrics. And then we take those ratings. If you're using the activated data sheet, you filled in the ratings. They all roll up to the score. We're on slide 28. They roll up to the essay score sheet. If you were doing it by hand, you'd need to hand bring them over and say, oh, I got a 3, a 3, a 4, a 2, and a 3. And you fill those in. And then you'll notice that each of the metrics is weighted inside each of the attribute categories. And then that rolls up to an attribute score of an ABCD. In our case, we get a 3, our overall average of the weighted metric ratings for our example site. Rolls up to an actual flat 3, which is a solid B for biotic metrics on our site. And then when we roll up the whole, once we get through all our metrics and we roll up this whole example site, you'll see that then each of the biotic, the abiotic, and the landscape metrics each get a weighting for, and then we'll get an overall sample area score, which will also be between 1 and 4, and will give us an ABCD for the whole sample area.